In 1945, the greatest war the world had ever seen finally came to an end. Cities were left in ashes, nations were shattered. Millions were either celebrating survival or mourning everything they had lost. For most of the world, the nightmare was finally over, but not for everyone. Because somewhere, thousands of miles from Tokyo, deep in the thick Philippine jungle, a Japanese soldier named Hiroo Onoda was preparing to continue a war he believed was still very much alive. Before the war ended, Onoda had been specially trained by Japanese intelligence. He wasn't a regular infantryman. He was taught survival, guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and absolute obedience. Then came his assignment. Onoda was ordered to the island of Lubang with instructions that were unbelievably strict. Do not surrender. Do not die. Do not trust anything the enemy says. And whatever happens, continue fighting. His commanders were clear. Japan would never give up. Reinforcements would definitely come. He just needed to survive and hold on. So when August 1945 arrived and Japan finally surrendered, the news eventually reached Lubang Island in the most unexpected way. Planes flew overhead. Leaflets fluttered down from the sky. They announced that the war was over, that soldiers were to come out, lay down their weapons, and return home. Onoda and his men read them carefully, and they laughed. To them, this wasn't peace. This was exactly what they had been warned about. Enemy trickery, psychological warfare, a trap to flush them out. And here's something important to understand. In Imperial Japan, surrender wasn't just discouraged. It was seen as shameful. Soldiers were expected to die before giving up. Discipline, loyalty, and obedience were everything. So to Onoda, the idea that Japan surrendered wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. He believed the empire still stood strong. He believed the war still raged. He believed his country needed him. So while the rest of the world tried to rebuild, Hiroo Onoda tightened his boots, shouldered his rifle, and prepared to carry on a war he refused to believe had ended. For the world, World War II ended in 1945. For Hiroo Onoda, it had only just begun. After refusing to believe the war was over, Hiroo Onoda and a small group of loyal Japanese soldiers disappeared into the jungle of Lubang Island. And there, they built a new reality, a reality where the war still raged, where Japan still needed them, where surrender was not an option. They lived deep in the thick tropical wilderness, far from villages and patrols. Their days became carefully planned routines, fueled by discipline and paranoia. They woke before sunrise. They cleaned their weapons. They patrolled the jungle as if enemy forces were still everywhere. They stole food from nearby farms. They hunted cattle. They raided rice storage when they could. Every footprint, every distant sound, every flicker of movement in the trees could be the enemy. They still reported to each other like soldiers, still followed military hierarchy, still spoke about the next phase of the war. To them, this was not madness. This was duty. Months turned into years, and years turned into a lifetime. Meanwhile, the world changed completely. Japan rebuilt. Cities rose out of ashes. Technology advanced. People started living peaceful lives again. But for Onoda, time had stopped in 1945. Occasionally, they found radios, old newspapers, scraps of information from the outside world. They read headlines saying the war was over. They heard broadcasts declaring peace. But every single time, they dismissed it. They told themselves, this is American propaganda. This is psychological warfare. This is how they break our spirit. They believed Japan would one day return. Planes would arrive. Troops would land. The war effort would resume. All they had to do was hold their ground. But the jungle is not a place for certainty. It is a place of fear, isolation, and slow psychological destruction. Every year, their group grew smaller. One surrendered. Two were killed in clashes with locals. Every loss was another reminder. They were completely alone. Yet even then, Onoda refused to break. His loyalty to his orders, his faith in his duty, his belief in Japan, was stronger than reality itself. To him, the true enemy wasn't the jungle, it was doubt. Time passed in the jungle, but time did not feel real. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. And as the world moved forward, Hiroo Onoda and his tiny group of soldiers stayed trapped in 1945. They still carried out patrols, still avoided villages, still believed they were fighting for Japan. But nature and fate do not care about loyalty. Slowly, their group began to disappear. One man finally broke. Exhausted, starving, and mentally shattered, he surrendered to local authorities. To Onoda, this wasn't relief. It was betrayal. To him, surrender meant dishonor. He believed his comrade had failed Japan. failed their orders, failed himself. Then came tragedy. The remaining soldiers had several violent encounters with local villagers and police. Panic, fear, misunderstanding, all of it mixed together in a deadly storm. 2 of Onoda's closest comrades were killed, one after another gone. Men he had trained with, laughed with, survived with. Men who had shared the same belief, the same duty, the same refusal to surrender. Now, they were dead, and suddenly, Hiroo Onoda was alone, truly, completely alone. No commanding officer, no fellow soldiers, no confirmation that he was right, no proof that Japan still needed him. Just a man, a rifle, and an unbreakable order echoing in his mind. Never surrender, never die, continue fighting. So he chose to keep going. He avoided human contact as much as possible. He traveled deeper into the jungle. He built new shelters. He studied the terrain like it was the only world that existed. Years became decades. People in nearby villages began to talk about him as if he were a ghost, a legend, a phantom soldier haunting the island. Some feared him. Some pitied him. Many doubted he was even real. But he was real, still wearing his uniform, still polishing his rifle, still believing with absolute certainty that the war was not over. Hiroo Onoda wasn't fighting America anymore. He wasn't fighting villagers. He wasn't even fighting the jungle. He was fighting reality itself. By the 1970s, Hiroo Onoda had become a myth. There were stories about him whispered in villages, rumors spread by fishermen and farmers, tales of a mysterious soldier who still patrolled the jungle, decades after the war had ended. Some believed he was dangerous. Some believed he was insane. Others refused to believe he existed at all. But Japan had not forgotten him. He had been officially declared dead. Memorial services were held in his honor. His family mourned him, yet reports kept coming in. Villagers claimed he was stealing supplies. Police officers swore they had exchanged gunfire with him. People said they had seen a man in a worn Japanese uniform vanish back into the trees. Eventually, Japan had to confront the truth. Onoda was still alive, and something had to be done. The Philippine government wanted peace on the island. Japan wanted closure, and the world was stunned that a soldier could still be fighting World War II nearly 30 years later. So efforts began to reach him. Leaflets were printed again. Fresh newspapers were left in the jungle. Photographs were shown, pictures of modern Japan rebuilt from the ruins of war. But Onoda refused to believe any of it. Every attempt to contact him, every message, every proof of peace, he dismissed as lies. To him, this was just another tactic, another psychological trick, another enemy strategy meant to weaken him. But then, something happened that no military operation could have achieved. In 1974, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki made a promise to himself. He would travel the world, find 3 things: a panda, the abominable snowman, and Hiroo Onoda. Most people laughed, but Suzuki was serious. He went to Lubang Island, walked into the jungle, and found the ghost everyone had been searching for. There, so it standing before him, was Hiroo Onoda. Not a myth, not a rumor, a real man. Older, worn, hardened by time, but still a soldier. Suzuki did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not try to force anything. He simply talked to him. He treated Onoda with respect, listened to him, spoke to him like a human being, not an enemy. And slowly, something incredible happened. Onoda trusted him, but even then, he refused to surrender. He told Suzuki, "I will not leave unless my commanding officer orders me directly." After nearly 30 years, he was still following the same order, still loyal to the same command, still trapped in 1945. Hiroo Onoda had made his position clear. He trusted Norio Suzuki. He believed he was Japanese. He believed he meant no harm. But even then, he refused to surrender, because to Onoda, surrender was not his decision to make. Only one man had the authority to end his war, his commanding officer. So Japan did something extraordinary. They went searching, not for a soldier, but for a man who had returned to normal life, an officer who no longer wore a uniform, who no longer expected to command anyone, a man who had built a quiet civilian life, and told him, "We need you to go back to the jungle." That former officer traveled to Lubang Island. He entered the jungle, and for the first time in nearly 30 years, Hiroo Onoda stood face to face with the man who had once sent him to war. The officer looked at him, not as a ghost, not as a myth, but as a soldier who had obeyed longer than anyone ever imagined. Then, he gave the order, a simple command, the command Onoda had waited almost 3 decades to hear. "Lieutenant Onoda, the war is over. Japan has surrendered. You are relieved of duty. For the first time since 1945. Hiroo Onoda believed it. He stood silently. He bowed his head. And then the soldier who refused to surrender finally laid down his rifle. On March 10, 1974, Hiroo Onoda surrendered his sword, his rifle, and ammunition, still in working condition, still carefully maintained, because to him, this wasn't a broken soldier returning home. This was a mission completed. Japan welcomed him back as a symbol of loyalty, discipline, and absolute devotion. Others saw him differently. Some called him a tragic figure, a man trapped by orders, a man who lost nearly half his life to a war that no longer existed. But whether you see him as a hero or a warning, Hiroo Onoda remains one of the most extraordinary soldiers in history. A man who kept his promise, even when the world moved on. A man who fought not on a battlefield, but against time, against isolation, against reality itself. For Hiroo Onoda, World War II did not end in 1945. It ended 29 years later,